Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. John Cook.
Welcome once again to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host this week, Dr. John Cook. Good Books Radio is a production of the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley as a service to the community and to public radio. With me today is Reyna Grande. Her memoir, A Dream Called Home, is an inspiring story. It's really timely. Here we are recording in November before the midterm elections when issues of immigration and asylum are really prominent in American consciousness. Reyna, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much.
This really is a wonderful story, and I don't have a bio, but that's okay. I think the memoir will speak for itself. You were someone who was born in Mexico, and you wanted to break the family cycle of poverty and hunger and lack of education, and your father was really strong on that too. The opening quote really says a lot, I think. You quoted Patricia Engel at the first of the book. All immigrants are artists because they create a life, a future, from nothing but a dream. Did you find that quote appropriate for the story you had to tell?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's why I picked that quote, because it spoke so much to me, because I really do think it captures the immigrant experience, of coming to this country with nothing but dreams, and you create a life out of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that
let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say this really speaks to all immigrants, not just Latino immigrants, but all immigrants in general. This is what they have been able to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a powerful story. And book one, Twice the Girl I Used to Be, is about your experience in UCal Santa Cruz. But before we get to that, let's talk about life in Iguala and what it was like to live there in poverty and hunger and lack of education and all of that. Tell us a little bit about your life there.
Yeah, well, my hometown, Iguala, is in the state of Guerrero, which is the second poorest state in Mexico. And there are not a lot of jobs there, not a lot of opportunities, very low-paying jobs. And it's also a very violent place now. That's where 4 years ago, 43 students disappeared. Mm-hmm. In my hometown. So it's a very difficult life, that the city gives you. And definitely people there are living a hand-to-mouth existence. And it's a very sad place. For me, being born into that kind of poverty, it definitely, I had everything against me, because in Mexico, when you're born into poverty, you don't usually get out of it. You die in the same poverty you're born in because of the lack of opportunities in that country. So my father, he ended up immigrating when I was 2, and then my mother immigrated when I was 4.5, and they came here to look for work, and me and my siblings had to stay behind to long for their return. And it was such a difficult time for us, because we no longer had our parents with us. We didn't know if they were going to come back, if they were going to forget us, if they were going to replace us with American-born children. So it's a trauma that I feel I'm still dealing with after all these years, that family separation.
Yeah. Well, now, during that time, when your mother left, you were left with Abuela Avila, and that was a struggle in and of itself, wasn't it?
Yeah. Abuela Avila was not a very nice person. She treated my siblings and me like we were burdens, and we were unwanted in her house. And she would spend a lot of the money my parents sent for us. She would spend it on other things. So sometimes my siblings and I would ask each other, what's the point of having our parents in the U.S. if we're treated like beggars here? And it was definitely difficult to live with relatives who were not able to give us that love and support that we desperately needed while our parents were gone. So I think this is why it made the separation so much worse for us.
And there's a tale you tell in there where your uncle brought ice cream and she didn't want you to have it.
Yeah.
That story really touched me deeply. That was kind of sad. She made you sit there and watch the ice cream melt.
Right. Yeah. It was a very difficult memory to write about, and I wanted to include that memory because in my other book, In the Distance Between Us, I write a lot about what it was like to live with my grandmother. So you get a really good sense of what our life was like in the other book. And with this book, I added that ice cream moment as a flashback, just to show you, once again, what life had been like. But that was just one example of the many, many other mean things that she did.
Now, the other grandmother, you remember fondly, Abuela Quinta, as kind-hearted and deeply religious, and that's the grandmother you knew in Abuela Quinta, right?
Yeah. My Abuela Quinta, she's my maternal grandmother, and she was really, really nice. I mean, she was very poor, and when we went to live with her, we were not getting any more money from my father. So my grandmother had to take care of us on her own, and she was extremely poor. So there were times when all we had to eat was a tortilla sprinkled with salt, and that's all we got. And but she gave us so much love, despite the poverty that we were living in at her house. She gave us a lot of love.
Now, the time comes when your father hires someone to help you cross, and he first considered just bringing the older siblings and not you because you were 9 and he was afraid you couldn't make it easily, but eventually decided to include you, and you crossed 3 times before you finally made it to stay in California, right?
Yeah, my father, at first he decided he was going to bring my sister Mago. Then he also said, okay, I'm going to bring Carlos too. And when he came to me, he said that I was going to have to stay because I was too little to run across the border. And he felt that I wasn't going to be able to make it. And I had to beg my father to not leave me because just the thought of being left again was overwhelming. And not only just being left again, but also being left without my sister, and the only reason why I had survived those years of separation was because I had my sister with me, and she did her best to look out for me. And now my father wanted to take her away too, and I couldn't bear it. So I begged him to not leave me, and I finally convinced him to bring me along. And of course, once we got to the border, I realized that he was right. I was very little, and I kept slowing down the group. I would get tired a lot, and my father had to carry me on his back. And then the 2 times when we got caught by Border Patrol, I felt so guilty because I thought it was my fault, that I didn't run fast enough. And then the 3rd time we tried it again, but at night. And that was really scary because we couldn't see anything. But that was the time when we finally succeeded in crossing. And, it's been really interesting because now my daughter, she's 10 years old, which is around the time when I crossed. And it has really given me a different perspective on my father because when I looked at my daughter, I would ask myself, could my daughter survive what I did? Could she cross the border? And I realized that because of what my father had done, I would never have to make that decision. I will never have to take my daughter to the border and expect her to get across. And I feel so thankful for my dad for what he did, And I know that we made a lot of sacrifices and we suffered a lot, but the suffering ends with me because my child will never have to go through that experience.
Mm-hmm. And that's a wonderful part of the story. Your father really wanted to drive you in breaking that cycle to make sure you got a good education. He valued higher ed. He expected perfect attendance and straight A's from you during school before you got to college. But there's this Jekyll and Hyde personality, because despite the fact that he was so supportive and helpful and a really hard worker, he had problems with alcohol and occasionally was abusive.
Yeah, to me that's really one of the biggest tragedies in my life, is that my father had so many good qualities that I admire. Even to this day, I admired how hardworking he was and how he had such high expectations of us, and he pushed us so hard to give the best of ourselves. And those are things that I really appreciate about my dad. But what really breaks my heart too is how, he was an alcoholic, and he had a very violent temper, especially when he was drinking. So my siblings and I, we lived through a lot of abuse at home. Mm-hmm. And that makes me sad, because I know that later on, when my father was diagnosed with liver cancer, and he changed so much. Like he wanted us to be with him all the time. He would call us a lot, and he just became such a different father from the one I had grown up with. And it broke my heart, because he died within a year after he was diagnosed. So cancer made him into the father I had been longing for, but cancer took him away from me so quickly that I didn't even get to enjoy that,
Mm-hmm. And now, during that time of abuse, when you were in the community college, it was so tough that your mentor at the community college, Diana, invited you to stay with her so that you could complete your 2-year college degree.
Yeah, that I think that was such one of the best things that ever happened to me. And like, even to this day, I am still surprised when I think of it, because I feel that my teacher really went above and beyond the class description. She wanted to help me, and I know that as a teacher, she had seen students who would drop out of school because of all their family problems, and she cared enough about me to try to help prevent that. And I appreciate that so much, that she opened her home to me, that she guided me and mentored me and made sure that I transferred, and that she put me on the path that I needed to be on in order for me to accomplish my dreams of higher education and having a career.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's describe that life in Santa Cruz, because that was a far cry from life in the concrete jungle of the Los Angeles megalopolis. When you got there and saw the beauty of the redwood forest and the idyllic setting that UCal Santa Cruz is in, that was quite an interesting time, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Los Angeles is this huge city, mostly concrete, not that many trees. And then I went to Santa Cruz, and it's the complete opposite of Los Angeles. The university is built in a redwood forest, and you walk around campus and you see deer, you see all these trees, banana slugs. It's just, you're immersed in nature. And I had never had that experience before. And it was just a wonderful place to be, especially for someone like me who was damaged in many ways, emotionally, psychologically. I needed a place like that to help me heal from that experience. So that's what happened while I was there. I began to heal. I began to become my own person, and I began to fight really hard for the dreams that I had.
Mm-hmm. Now, you had some great experiences there, and that, but you also had some challenges because you became, as you put it, hyper aware of your brownness. The first place you went to look for groceries, a co-op, had what can only be described as liberal Northern California type food, wheat germ and tofu and couscous and granola and no tortillas. That must have been an interesting day when you saw what was available.
That definitely was a culture shock for me because I had never heard of tofu in my life. I had never heard of like dairy meat that was meatless. I didn't even know what that was. All these things that were new to me, soy milk, all of that. And I desperately wanted some comfort food. I wanted Mexican food. And then I went to the other market in town, and it was the same thing. All this like weird food, and even tortillas that were green or red because they had added like spinach and tomato to the dough, and that was so strange to me. And when I was on the bus, I was feeling so alone, and I was feeling that I didn't belong in that place. And then all of a sudden, I see this Mexican market outside the window, and that was a big moment for me because I knew then that I had found that one place where I would find home.
Mm-hmm. So this was a wonderful time for you in this idyllic setting. You were honing your skills as a creative writer. You were working on your novel Across 100 Mountains. You also got connected with a folklorical group there, which made you feel more at home as well.
Yeah. When I discovered that there was Mexican folk dancing going on campus, I was so shocked because I would have never expected that in Santa Cruz. Never. I mean, I had not really seen a whole lot of Mexican anything, and then I found out that there's Mexican folk dancing going on. And I joined the group, and it was just such a beautiful experience to connect to my culture in that way. I had never been exposed to Mexican folk dancing, and when I discovered it helped me to find something to celebrate about my culture and to something new and different. It was also by joining the group that I met more immigrant students or children of immigrants, and that also made me feel more connected to the campus and the community. And yeah, I mean, when I graduated from the university, I even started a little group at the school where I worked, and I inspired a new generation of kids to love dancing, Mexican folk dancing.
Now, I want to note that while you crossed undocumented, you subsequently gained your green card and eventually citizenship, although it got lost in some bureaucratic paper shuffles. You eventually gained citizenship, and your time working in the L.A. school was really challenging with those eighth graders who were as tall as you when you introduced yourself as Senorita Grande, and they said, "Can we call you Senorita Chiquita?" because they were taller than you.
Yeah, but oh man, working at the middle school was really scary because I did not go to college to become a teacher. I never even took a class on education. And majoring in creative writing doesn't necessarily prepare you for a real job. So I couldn't find work anywhere, and I heard that the school district had a teacher shortage, and they were hiring anybody who had a PA. It didn't matter in what. And I went in and I applied, and then they trained me for 1 week, and then they threw me into the classroom. And it was a challenging classroom. It was inner city Los Angeles, halfway through the school year, and my students had 5 different substitutes by the time I arrived. So definitely and I was shorter than them, and and I just felt so insecure in every single way. And of course the students noticed that right away about me, about how insecure I was, and they took advantage of it, and they pretty much did whatever they wanted, and I had such a hard time ruling over the class, even though I'm supposed to be the big queen. Definitely I could not do it. It was one of the hardest times in my life, I think, being in that kind of
during that time, you did get a chance to teach sixth graders who were much more interested in learning, but they returned you to eighth grade, and at the time they adopted a policy where as long as you got D's in English and math, you could advance to high school. And so there was really not much motivation for the eighth graders when you returned there. So that made it tough. But fortunately, someone told you about adult education, and you went to get certified so that you could teach adults English as a second language.
Yep. Yeah, that was actually really good advice from my teacher. She encouraged me to switch over to the adult school as soon as I got my credential. And that's what I did. And it was actually such a beautiful experience to switch over, because once I started working at the adult school, it gave me an insight into my parents, into what it was like to work with adults, with parents, and to hear their stories too, because they would share stories with me about the children they had left behind and the struggles that they were dealing with, and trying to stay connected to their children even though they were back in their countries. And so it gave me an insight into my own parents' experience with immigration. Mm-hmm. And I liked it because the students, the adult students, really wanted to be there, and they worked so hard. Even though they had, been at work all day, they still came to class ready to learn. And I loved that. I loved being able to be there for them and to help them achieve their goals.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your story, there's a couple of times when you become enamored of some man for a while and then realize it's not the right relationship for you. But in this adult ed situation, you met Cory,
mm-hmm.
and that was a big change in your life.
Yeah. I one of the things that I write about in the book is how my father, the relationship I had with my father really affected the relationship I had with other men. And one thing I did fall into, and I hear this happens a lot. It's very common with women like me who have complicated relationships with their fathers, is that we end up and looking for love in the wrong place and trying to find our father's love in other men. And yes, I did. I had a lot of really bad relationships. And finally, I was able to break out of that cycle, and to finally have a relationship with a man who was not bad for me, who was not like my father, and who really valued me and treated me very well and respected me, and didn't add more drama to my life, which was really important.
Yeah. It was interesting because he first connected with you as a fellow teacher, and he was interested in the fact that you were writing a novel. But he got to know your life in Iguala by visiting your family with you, and you got to know his life in Racine, which was a very interesting time, I'm sure, the first time you'd ever seen snow or felt that cold in your life.
Yeah, that was really funny because, I was 29 years old, and this was my first time watching snow fall, and it was so magical, to be in this place. And it was literally white America, right? I mean, everything's white around me, and everyone is white around me, and I was feeling a little out of place and scared. But it was also a beautiful experience. my first time making a snowman and having a sled ride and a snowmobile ride, and it was a very magical experience.
And I love the part where you go to pick a tree out by cutting down a fir tree.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that I would have never done in LA. Never.
Mm-hmm.
There are no tree farms around LA like that.
I was interested in how gracious his family was to you. He had a girlfriend when you first met him who was studying abroad to finish her dissertation, and yet they seemed to welcome you into the family and wanted to get to know you, and just were really friendly and nice.
Yeah, that's something I really did like about his family too, that they were very, very welcoming, and especially his mother. She was just so lovely with me, but especially with my son. Since the moment that they met us, my son was just showered in love and attention, and they've always, to this day, they've always been very, very kind to both my children, just kind and loving, and I appreciate that so much, because my mother, to this day, she's very distant. She's not exactly a very good grandmother. So sometimes it makes me sad, that because she's so distant and removed, my children they don't really have much of a relationship with my mother. But with my mother-in-law, it's such a different story because she is very kind to them and very loving. So I'm glad they have at least one good grandmother.
Mm-hmm. Part of your understanding of your mother came, though, when she was selling things in your yard, and you saw her with her dog Güero, and when the dog misbehaved, she would hit him, but then she would be very nurturing to him afterwards, saying she hit him once when he ran out into the street, and she said, "You could have gotten hurt." And so you had the mix of the abusive mother and the loving mother seen in the way she cared for her dog.
Right. Yeah. It's, that's something that I really like to explore about my mother is these contradictions, right? She can definitely be a very distant and unloving, and then at the same time, she can love a lot. And I actually experienced this with my youngest brother, because my siblings and I are not very close to him. And this is my half brother, that she had with her other husband. And through the years, we've just never been close to him. But I think part of it is that although my mother was very removed from us and she just was not very loving with the four of us, we saw her being capable of love with my little brother. Mm-hmm. And she loved him too much, to the point where I think she damaged him in a way with too much love, So I see that the contradictions of my mother all the time, and definitely that moment that I write about in the book with the dog was one of those moments where I could see how she could love and hurt at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we're out of time. This is a great read, Dream Called Home, especially for my friends who are our listeners in the Rio Grande Valley. You would probably find this a heartwarming story, and the awarenesses that Reyna shares with us through the course of the book are really fabulous, and I recommend it very highly. I remind our listeners that if you don't catch our program at its regularly scheduled time on the radio, you can catch up with us on our YouTube channel, Good Books Radio, Strong and Cook. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening, and make it a great day.